Welcome to the Law School Toolbox Podcast. Today, we're talking with a special guest, Mihal Ansik, to talk about transferring law schools after your 1L year. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Allison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website, Career Dicta. Allison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on iTunes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started. Welcome back. Today we are discussing something many law students have considered at one time or another, transferring to a new law school after their 1L year. And joining me today on the podcast is Mihal Ansik, a graduate of Harvard Law School as a transfer student who currently works to provide legal services and education tools to women working to reunify with their children and families after incarceration. And in her spare time, of which she has plenty, of course, she is a tutor for the Law School Toolbox and the Bar Exam Toolbox. So thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you, Lee. I'm excited to talk about this.
Yeah, so transferring is something we hear a lot about when we talk to 1Ls or even folks who are applying to law school. They kind of think about transferring as something that they can kind of keep in their pocket for the future. I think a lot of people maybe didn't get into the law school of their dreams the first time they applied, or so they're hoping to land there maybe when they're a 2L. Sometimes, life happens, family circumstances change, you need to move geographically, so people want to transfer for those reasons. Or sometimes you just are a rock star your first year and you find out you can go to a different school if you want to, which is how most people I know transferred. And you transferred after your 1L year. So is this something that you had been thinking about throughout that year or something you'd planned on?
It wasn't actually. So I was definitely in the category of people who got my 1L grades back after the first semester, was shocked. And then sort of toyed with the idea, but also needed some encouragement from other people. And, as we'll talk about over the course of the podcast, there are so many pros and cons to weigh. It's a deeply personal decision. And I'll just be speaking from the kinds of things that were important to me and that I factored in. Mm-hmm. But I think regardless of which category you fall in, whether you come in thinking like, okay, I want to crush it this first year so that I can end up somewhere else, or if you, like me, are like, oh, I can do this. Mm-hmm. Maybe I want to. I would definitely, from the outset, suggest that wherever you start, try to be somewhere where you could see yourself spending 3 years. I think that even though transferring is totally attainable, it's not a guarantee, and you might change your mind. I think regardless of whether you're one of those folks who comes in knowing that you want to make a change down the line, or if, like me, you just realize at some point that it's something that you could do. I think starting out in a place where you could see yourself for the next 3 years is really important. Law school is challenging enough without having one foot out the door. And actually it can really benefit you both academically and in terms of what you offer to your transfer school if you have shown engagement in the campus community and in your classroom as well, obviously. So I would say, even if someone's considering it or if it's something they really, really want, that being somewhere where you could also still be happy and feel fulfilled and feel like you're getting the best law school experience possible, regardless of where you end up, is really an important starting place, at least.
I think that's an incredibly important piece of advice that I think is downplayed in this discussion, is this idea that if it doesn't work out to transfer, or you get in, but financially it doesn't work out, you don't want to be saddled with this disappointment or heavy feeling about the rest of your law school experience. You're still going to have a lot of opportunities wherever you're in law school. And most folks will find if you do excel and are at the top of your class at any law school, opportunities are going to be available for you if you differentiate yourself through excellence. So I think it is important to say, this is okay, but maybe this alternative is okay too, if it works out.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah. Well, if a listener is considering transferring or has a dream of transferring down the future, I thought we could talk about a few things that they need to consider, as part of their 1L year. And I think you mentioned it. You kind of got to do well academically. That's kind of the first thing.
Yeah, and I really want to be cautious around this conversation because while doing well academically is a really important ingredient in transferring, putting more pressure on yourself to do well academically can end up
fair point.
That, yeah. And so I think the way I would frame it is, engage earnestly. I think that's what really helped me when I went into law school. I really saw it as a vocational school. I had been working in the courts for a few years before I actually went to law school. So I was working with incarcerated kids and doing advocacy for them or with them in the juvenile delinquency system. And so I had seen, what being a lawyer looks like in practice every day. I would collaborate with the attorneys that were representing these kids. And so I was like, well, I want to do that. So I'm just going to get this degree and go out and get this job. And so when I was going into law school, what I was interested in was how the law actually has an impact on people in the world. And so for me, it was a very sort of practical and contextualized experience. So when I was, learning criminal law, I was trying to, learn it from the perspective of how will this be useful? Obviously, there are a lot of things that you learn in your 1L where you're like, how in the world could this be useful? And that connection isn't made. But I think any way that you can sort of connect it to your interest or to something that you're curious about is really helpful. And
it helps you pursue excellence, right? I mean, because to me, grades are less about grades. You can't do anything about a curve. All you can do is do your best, and then the grades will fall where they may.
Totally.
But to be the best lawyer you can be, I love the point you made about it being a vocational school. That's how I approached law school as well. I had been working outside of the court system. I'd been working in a corporate job, but still I came from it as that perspective. I had been working kind of in a trade of some sort. I've been a consultant and, the law was a new career path and I wanted to be good at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that ends up coming through then on the sort of the unfortunate arbiter of law school grades, which is the final exam.
Right.
And I think a really sort of important, an important factor in the law school exam is voice and perspective. And even though so much of it feels like regurgitation, at the end of the day, you distinguish yourself when at least, on some level, you've had some kind of connection to the material in some way. Again, I with some subjects more than other, that connection might be forced. But it can be done, especially if you're someone who is thinking about how the law plays out in the world for better or worse. And so another sort of tip that I would offer, and this is something that is another really important factor in transferring, is that the professors and the relationships that you build with them are extremely important. And if you notice, professors are really going to frame their classes in a way that they want you to repeat back to them on the exam.
Right, because their way to interpret the law is the right way.
Exactly. And no two contracts classes are the same.
Nope.
And you'll find that they're they have these themes that they return to, and then you're just like, oh my God, if I hear the words managerial judging one more time,
right.
day, you want to write managerial judging like 4 times on that final
or public. We're going to look at the public policy ramifications of this decision. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that's them serving up an answer to you. That's them, dropping hints that like they imagine that they love the sound of their own voice, so that when they read that in your exam, they're just hearing the music of their own voice being repeated back to them.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to plagiarize your professor by using their words in the exam, because for them that really feels like, oh, like this person's paying attention. And they're absorbing this in the way that, I was hoping to teach them to absorb it. Obviously, that doesn't mean that you should be afraid to challenge your professors or to be critical of what you're learning. And I think that's those are really useful conversations to have both in class and in office hours. And again, that adds to the earnest engagement. So I'm not saying that you need to sort of unquestioningly absorb everything that you learn, or to not be critical of it, or not think like, wait, like, doesn't this perpetuate injustice? Or like, I don't like the way that this was taught, or,
right.
Or like, wow, I really have a problem with, the way this conversation was handled. But those can be opportunities for even deeper engagement in a lot of ways. And yes, of course, on the exam, you do want to give your professor what they're looking for. But a deepened understanding, believe it or not, I think is actually, and it ends up being visible on the exam.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
And I think one thing about what you're saying, which is important for students to note, is, if you are engaged academically, if you are engaged in class and not messing around on the internet, if you are doing all of your reading, if you're going to office hours and engaging with the material, if you're, talking about the material in your study group and you're practicing doing hypotheticals to apply it to fact patterns, all of those activities are likely going to result in pretty good academic performance. Those are the activities that you intend to do. So just by being engaged and laying the foundation for this possibility to transfer, I think you're really just laying the groundwork for excelling academically, which is great. There's no downside to that. That is going to open whatever doors it does. And I think the one thing that some law students can think about with their grades for their 1L year, if they're considering transferring maybe to a school that they didn't get into the first time around, is it can be another opportunity to show their excellence in a way that is not a standardized test. I think, there can a whole another podcast could be on the validity of the LSAT to gauge, how well everybody's going to do in law school. We won't dive into that today, but, I'll say for me personally, I excel better in a classroom environment than I do on a standardized test. And, my grades are going to be a much better representation, in my opinion, of how I would perform academically in law school than the LSAT would. And I think there are a lot of students who might feel that way. And the idea that you could transfer based on those 1L grades should give you a lot of hope, because it gives you the opportunity to have something else that the schools can evaluate you against, not just the standardized test with logic games on it.
I couldn't agree more. I don't have much to add to that, because I completely agree. I am not a tricky test taker. Like the way that I was like, what does this, like the 125th question I'm answering, like, how can I really be in the moment with this question? As opposed to being like, what is just the shortcut that I really should be taking?
Right.
And, I definitely learned to do that eventually for the bar exam. But again, that's not how I start out with. But that did actually end up benefiting me in law school, because I was sort of, as I was learning material, really asking questions about it, really trying to think about how it applied. I think law school is a great opportunity to figure out how you learn also. So I learned best just in a really discursive way. So luckily I found like 2 other very sort of chatty, thinky people, and we studied together, and like a lot of people were like, we hate how you study with each other. We'd show up for a day and then end up leaving, because it was a lot of me and this guy just like screaming at each other. But about like what something meant and whether it was stupid. Mm-hmm. And eventually when it's stupid, you write about it and you apply it. And but it helped us sort of really get deep into what this law looks like, sort of played out through narrative and played out through argument. And that could be intense for a lot of people, and a lot of people are solitary studiers, but right. I think, being true to that, and I'm actually like, I think that the people who left, like, were really good at sort of listening to themselves. And mm-hmm. even the third person within our group, me and this guy, like, we would exchange, practice exam answers. Mm-hmm. And she hated doing that. So she just opted out. And so I think, listening to yourself and the way you learn and not sort of falling into the traps of what other people are doing is, incredibly important, because it can be, everyone's doing, it's 1L year. So everyone's sort of figuring it out for the first time. And I think a lot of people compensate for that by, acting like they do have the manual right. on how your 1L should look. But at the right. end of the day, everyone is sort of like grasping at straws in the dark with a blindfold on in a dark windowless basement.
It's so true. I think that's really true. And one of the things I love, because you're a little closer to your law school experience than I am, and not to age myself, but one of the things that I'm thinking about as we're talking about this is not to totally nerd out, but I mean, come on, we all work together, like helping people through law school and the bar exam. So we're all like objectively a little nerdy, super nerdy, but I get kind of like nerdy excited when we talk about some of this stuff, because I remember some of those pivotal moments, those aha moments in law school when you do figure stuff out with your friends, when the law does start to make sense. And I just think it's so important for law students, transferring or not transferring aside, when you're thinking about things academically and you're struggling academically, to be able to get creative and figure out how you can study so you can engage with this material is like where the magic happens, mm-hmm. And the happiest lawyers that I know are practicing some sort of law where they get nerdy and engaged with the material. That's what excites them. That's what they wanted to write about in law school. That's what the classes that they took, the seminars in were about. And so you want to engage with as much law as you can, because you're going to find, if you don't go to law school and you don't know what you want to do, I think you're going to find it by seeing what you find exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to make it sound easy or like, just like walk in and be chill and like have fun. And
no, it's a ton of work.
Great. Like that's so, yeah, exactly. Like that is not most people's experience. And so I want to sort of demystify that by also saying that we went to our school resources for help. So we had mm-hmm. someone who was in a position at the school whose job it was to talk through exams, like she was basically, unfortunately, I can't remember.
Do they call it academic support?
Yeah, it was something like that. So
yeah, it's like academic success or academic support program or something like that.
Totally. And we went before our first set of exams. And then even after we had done well the first semester, we went after our second set of exams because, we'd never done this before. Right. And so, and the help is there. So definitely go out and take it. And that is someone who can help you sort of customize your study experience. And there were so many things where we were like, oh, wait, we're allowed to have the answer to that. There were so many questions we had where we thought it was supposed to be all mysterious. And she was like, well, I can't tell you about how this professor generally writes their exams. But instead she was like, oh, here's a file of the past 20 exams that this professor has ever offered. And here's a file of the past 28 answers that were ever given to that.
Right.
And so like,
you can put it together.
Yeah, we were like, wait, are we cheating? Like, don't see anything.
Right.
Maybe she doesn't know what she's doing right now. But that help is actually out there. That support is out there. And so this isn't like we walked in and we just knew how to ace law school and we, had information that other people didn't have. We literally knocked on the door that had the academic support plaque on it and sat down and asked, like, how do we do this? And then she was like, here's how to do it. Obviously, there's a limit to what they can tell you, but it was enough information where we, in a lot of situations, knew what to expect, and in other situations, got a sense of how this professor, like, what their jam was, and how they like to, some professors like the kitchen sink, and others just wanted, a paragraph per issue and move on. And so we were able to get that information, as well as just really good study help. And on top of that, just emotional support. So someone who is there to tell us it's okay, like, based on what I'm hearing, you've got this. Based on what I'm hearing, you might want to spend a little more time on this. So this, it wasn't necessarily like this magical quality that we possessed. We definitely sought the help when we needed it.
Yeah, you got to ask for help, and you got to use all the resources available to you, whether they're at your school, like academic support, whether they're TAs for your given classes, whether they're using tutors like our team. If you need guidance, you want to learn, like, there are people who can guide you through this process, and nobody in the end is going to ask how you excelled academically, maybe unless I invite you on the podcast, and then I will talk to you about it. But, later in life, nobody's going to be like, how did you get an A? They're just going to be like, great, you got an A. And you're like, thanks.
Totally. And there's no shame in it. Like, despite what sort of the culture of law school can be, I think as many opportunities for collaboration as you can create in your first year, the better, because actually the practice of law is intensely collaborative. Yes. We don't necessarily learn how to do that in our classes. And so whether it's collaborating with your fellow students or with your professors, or with these also, these like support roles that are on campus, I think that's another really, really helpful exercise, not just for academic success or for transferring, but also just for the practice of law generally.
Yeah, back when I was in 1L, one of my first disappointing grades was in legal writing, which like really hit me hard.
Mine too.
Yeah, and it was really devastating to me. And when I started interviewing at big firms, and you'd get in with some hiring partner, typically a litigator, they would love to take your transcript and ask you whatever they thought would make you uncomfortable. And so I almost always would get asked about this first semester legal writing grade, always to see if I would, crack, or it was never to like really genuinely ask how I felt about it. But it was funny because my next semester, I high scored the class, and that transition for me was all about, kind of the discovery you're talking about, learning what the professor wanted. I was not writing it in the way that the professor wanted. I was writing the way I thought was better, which was false when it came to grades. And I had to kind of go through discovery. And I remember sitting in an interview the first time this happened to me with this litigation hiring partner, and he was just like, well, what happened here? Blah, blah, blah. Aren't you embarrassed about this? And I was like, well, I was disappointed, but then I took all these steps and I figured out what was going wrong. And then I high scored the class. And I think if you're hiring somebody to work for you, you would like somebody who could acknowledge when they are not doing their best work and figure out how to do their best work and then really excel. And he just stared at me, and I was like, so there, because it's like those disappointing grades or those learning experiences are all part of this process that makes you a better lawyer. That experience, although it was a bummer on my transcript, made me a better law student because it forced me to really evaluate what had gone wrong and fix it.
Oh my gosh, I'll never forget the moment during my 1L internship, like the summer after my 1L year, where I wrote a memo and was like, oh man, Iraq actually is kind of better. I hated to admit it, but I was like, this is really working for me. Oh,
I know. It's like you start to see it everywhere. I know.
I think that was like the most selling out I felt I was doing for 1L here. Was like, fine, I'll do Iraq, but I won't like it. And
I'm probably sure if you dissect emails to my parents, or something about coordinating pickup of my kid, it'll be like, the issue is what time my son should be picked up at preschool, and this is the time at which he should be picked up at preschool, and this is how it works, and he might ask you these questions, therefore please allow yourself ample time to park and do all this stuff. I'm sure if you really dug into it, it'd be pretty disturbing.
That's so haunting.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, something else I think students forget, whether or not you're planning to transfer, but I think even if you're planning to leave a school, I think you mentioned this earlier, was investing in the school community, joining clubs, going to speeches, engaging with your professors, and still kind of being all in with your experience, even if you think you might exit out, because the next school is going to look favorably on that. They want engaged students, but it also really allows you, again, to kind of immerse yourself in the law school experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are so many reasons to do that. I think one is just like so that you can enjoy your life a little more.
Yeah, it's true. And eat pizza. They always had pizza at they always had pizza at every event. Oh, yeah. So there's lots of free food when you get engaged in law school. They will always feed you. That is one thing.
Oh my God, totally. I thought I was gonna like do a major swearing off of pizza after law school, and like it took like a week. I was back on it. But,
you were back on the pizza train.
Yeah. I mean, you can't beat bread and melted cheese.
No, you really can't.
But yeah, I think the first thing is just like you wanna stay grounded and you wanna stay connected, and I mean, at least I did. And I think with all the challenges that can arise your 1L year, you want to offset that with whatever it is that brings you fulfillment, whether it's, just like hanging out or, with people. So there are some law schools that have like wine clubs. Mm-hmm. Or whether it's, doing a pro bono project. So even though a lot of law schools don't let 1Ls do clinics, there are other opportunities to engage with the community and remember that there's a world beyond law school still. And so I think just the maybe primary purpose of that would be so that you're not living your life in terms of like this thing that may or may not happen at the end of the year and letting the moment slip by. So I think there's just something sort of existential about about immersing yourself. But at the end of the day, also, it gives you something to let your transferring school know that you've done. So I was reviewing someone's transfer essay, and they just spent the whole time really bad-mouthing their last law school. So they were like, here are the reasons that it's inferior, and like these are the things that you have that this place doesn't have. And I think what you really want to do instead is like highlight what it is that you got from that law school that gave you a great foundation to then contribute to the next law school, and the contributions that you made to that law school community while you were there, and how you might offer the same sort of value added to the next institution. So I think that treating your 1L law school, if you do plan on leaving it, as sort of an afterthought or as like this second choice that you want to get out of as quickly as possible, could end up doing you a disservice. First of all, because it's really hard to be present when you're thinking about that. And when you're not present, it's really hard to, again, as we've sort of been speaking about over and over again, engage in a sort of deep and earnest way with what you're learning. And also it could end up leaving you with less to offer the next school. And so I think there is a flip side to investing in the community, which is that it can make it a lot harder to leave. I definitely had these feelings around, projects I'd started with people where it did feel like I was abandoning things that, that I really grew to care about. Obviously, you're going to be leaving friends that, especially if you're going to a school out of state, you're going to be leaving friends that, you've been in the trenches together of 1L, and there's really, there are a few relationships that ended up being more meaningful to me, even though I went into law school being like, well, it's cool if I don't make friends, like it'll be fine. And I'm still really, really close with the people that I knew my 1L year. And that I grew close with. So luckily, even though I left, it actually didn't end up impacting our relationships, and we're still very close. But I think that, that is a consideration if you're starting, let's say a new group on campus, or some sort of project that you do want to see through. it is a consideration about how it will, first of all, impact the project to leave, and also just sort of your own feelings around it. So that does come up, but I think at the end of the day, the investment is worth it, both for your own well-being and also if transferring is a goal of yours, it's definitely helpful to be able to say, like, look at all the great things I did, and
right.
look at all the great things I got, and like I definitely want to continue this law school experience, and these are the ways in which it can be even further enriched.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a helpful approach.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. All right, well, let's switch over to a little of the nitty-gritties about transferring. So if you've never looked into transferring, typically a transfer application includes a resume, a personal statement, a couple letters of recommendation from current law school professors, your undergraduate transcript, your law school transcript, and your LSAT report. So I think some students might question when they should start thinking or working on this transfer application, and I think it depends on your situation. If you know that this is an ongoing goal, I don't think starting early, and early is probably like after that first semester, is necessarily a bad thing, especially because your personal statement, you want to be very compelling, that maybe it's something you want to draft and let sit for a while and come back to. Or perhaps you are really interested in one school and you want to go visit them or visit that school during the spring and meet with the admissions department of that school a few times. It might be a good idea to just kind of get your act together as much as you can, so you have all of the pieces that you can get. So when it's time to execute the application, there's no delay. Of course, if you're one of those folks who kind of gets this bug to transfer later on because you've done so well academically and maybe professors or other mentors have nudged you to try it, you may not have started early, but that's okay. It seems like most schools have deadlines to accept transfer applications in the summer, June or July, depending on the school. So you have a little bit of time. Most law school semesters end like the first week in May.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, sure, if it makes you feel better to get things started early and to be to have that be a goal, then by all means do it. Again, I would recommend kind of not thinking about it at all once you start studying for your second semester finals.
Oh yeah, totally.
Adds such a level of pressure that you don't need. So I wouldn't make it necessarily like the reason for doing everything that you're doing, just because not to be a naysayer and say like because you're bound to be disappointed, but only because it could create another layer of anxiety that could just end up getting in your way. So yeah, I got started pretty late in the process. I don't think that I started doing applications until after my 2L grades came out.
Okay.
Would have been sometime in May. I can't remember if there was any deadline earlier than that, but I highly doubt it. What that means is that you may, like me, end up having basically a 2-week period before getting an acceptance and finding an apartment in a different state. So it was definitely a major hustle at the end of the summer. But by that point, I think I had heard from a few other schools and was sort of mentally preparing myself. I think I had started having conversations with professors. I certainly had, actually, because I got a recommendation from one of my 2L from a second semester professor. And so it was, they were non-committal conversations, but as they got to know me through class and again, because I was going to office hours, as the time for finals came around, I did let a couple of professors know, based on our relationships, that if things went as well the second time around, that I would perhaps think about transferring. And so I was able to sort of weigh those pros and cons with them as well. Again, like, professors are a really great resource for thinking through what the rest of your law school experience can look like there and in different schools. And a lot of them had taught at other schools around the country, and so they were able to sort of weigh in on the culture of those other schools, what I might expect if I were to go in as a transfer. And so I think I was doing more than preparing to apply. I think I was mostly doing a lot of information gathering during my second semester, and just trying to incorporate that into my thinking. But I definitely dropped it as soon as second semester finals were coming, because I knew that for me personally, and again, everyone handles anxiety and goals differently. For some people, they need to have that as a goal. Like, they need to sort of have their vision board up and have it,
right,
as pictures of all the schools they want to go to, and they're like, this is why I'm doing this. And that is if that works for you, then that's fantastic, and definitely do that. For me, I had to just be in a space of like, no matter what happens, I'm really proud of myself. I'm proud of what I've accomplished, and I'm going to just sort of, make this process as fulfilling and interesting to me as possible, and just do my best. Wherever that lands me is terrific.
Yeah. And I think that kind of even lends into like how many schools to apply to and all of that stuff. It's a very personal choice based on your own individual circumstances, because if you're able to be happy where you are, then maybe your pool of schools that you're applying to transfer to are really just the schools that you think you could be even happier or would give you an opportunity that maybe your current school wouldn't.
Yeah, definitely. I did not pick a lot of schools to transfer to. I think I applied to fewer than I might have only applied to 4, to be honest. Now that I think back on it. And 2 were on the East Coast and 2 were on the West Coast, because I'm from the West Coast, but I'd been living on the East Coast for over 6 years. And so, so some of the things that I factored in terms of thinking about where to apply as a transfer. I mean, my reason for going to law school and all my work has been social justice focused. So obviously I was concentrating on places that had a lot of clinical opportunities, and just, a lot of opportunities to deepen my practice within social justice and public interest work. And so that ends up sort of highlighting a few places in particular. I also wanted geographic flexibility. So I was attending a school, 1L, that had deserved like an amazing regional reputation. And the people that come out of there are such brilliant and fantastic lawyers. If I decided that I wanted to stay where I was forever, then that would have been a terrific school to go to for my entire 3 years. And again, anything is possible. Even if you're going to a regional school, of course you can move across the country and something will work out. But I guess, it was a consideration. I think it's disingenuous to have ended up going to HLS and be like, yeah, but I didn't really care that, it has this reputation.
Right. I mean, of course, that's one of the reasons why you go there.
I would not blame people for turning off the podcast right now if that was.
Well, I mean, when you submitted your resume to me, it wasn't like I was like, she went to Harvard, trash can, I mean.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So yes, obviously I had my own calculated decisions that I was making when I decided to go there. And so one of those was geographic flexibility, because like I said, my family is on the West Coast. And so I knew that I might not want to stay where I was for my entire career and wanted it to be a little easier to make the transition. So those were a couple of the categories where, they were deal breakers. They were places that definitely had a lot of public interest opportunities. And even though I think there are a lot of institutions that have more globally a social justice, there are definitely institutions that have a more social justice oriented mission as a whole than Harvard. I wouldn't say it's that kind of place. At the same time, it is so rich in resources. It had 1,000,001 clinics. I could dive in right away into 14 different kinds of pro bono projects. So it's a big enough school that there's a really large public interest and social justice community on campus. And so that factored in for me. And then being able to go somewhere where anywhere that I decided that I wanted to practice, there would be there would be sort of a recognizable institution.
Yeah. I think that that's a good point. I think other things folks need to consider, even if you get your transfer acceptances, or if you're looking at different schools, you've also got to think about money. Sometimes you might have scholarship opportunities at the school that you're at because you're excelling academically. You might not at new schools, financial aid packages, the cost of living in a different metropolitan area. All of those things, they're not the glorious, exciting parts of law school, but they're the grown-up, you got to think about them, parts of the law school experience.
I think that was the biggest debate for me, to be honest, because I did have a full scholarship to where I was going. And I think I have such a huge privilege having gone to HLS and having my loans repaid for me. And I think I was really weighing again, the scholarship against the loan repayment program. And luckily I had those options. Obviously, if people aren't going into the type of work where they're going to get their loans repaid by the school, then it might be a closer call.
So it's definitely something you have to chew on. You got to really play the long game when it comes to money, because life gets complicated and you have to be able to make those decisions.
Yeah. And I will say I got my, so Harvard was the last school that I heard from, and I heard from them in August. And even then I wasn't like, okay, I'm definitely transferring. I still sat on it for a while. I was pretty unsure. And a big part of that was the money. I mean, it is just like jaw-droppingly expensive, and being able to go to school for almost free is a huge privilege. Yeah. So, and like really takes off a lot of the angst of going to law school. And so, at the end of the day, I had no ambivalence about, or ambiguity about the fact that I would be doing public interest work for my career. And so I was able to rely on loan repayment as a factor in favor of transferring. But I think it's a harder question when you're not sure that that's going to be available to you.
I think that's very true. Other things, I think we've talked about it a little bit. I really liked how you talked about, you knew that you wanted to do social justice work. And before the end of the podcast, we're going to talk about the social justice work that you do, because I find it amazingly fascinating and important work that you do. So we'll give your work a plug too. If people are wondering what you do for your other day job. But it's important to just think about where you're going to be happy and where you're going to thrive. I loved the comment you made about talking to law professors about how different schools have different cultures, how different schools are set up. Law professors have often been visiting professors' places. They've gone to different schools. They have friends that teach at different schools. And you need to pick a place where you're going to be happy. I think you perform better if you're happy than when you're depressed. So it's a good idea to really ask those questions and see if you're going to thrive at the place where you're at, but you're worried that the fit is not good at your transfer opportunity. That's something I think you do really need to sit with, because happiness is what's happening now. We all have to do hard things for the future, but there's a lot to be said for excelling in the present as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I did go into law school thinking, and we can only be immune to so much, but I did go in having worked for a while before I ended up going back to law school. I did feel like I had different metrics by which to measure my life besides how I was doing in law school. Yeah. And when it got really hard, I did try to sort of hold on to perspective of like, okay, like this doesn't have to take up this much space in my life, and other things are more important. And obviously, like, I don't want this to get to a place where it's really dangerous for me to be continuing this experience. And so I think both in my 1L school and at HLS, my first order of business was to find my people. And I think that's really an important anchor throughout law school. And I think anywhere you go, that can really be a saving grace, and you can find your people, even if it's two. That's really all you need. And so that was really the first thing that I focused on when I transferred, even more than building relationships with professors, even more than knowing the fastest way to get from my apartment to campus or where my classrooms were. I like kind of went down the roster of groups that I knew that I'd be, gravitating towards, or these pro bono opportunities that I was talking about, or just places where I thought that, I could find people where we might have common interests or share values. And really the first day that I landed on campus, and also, having people set up introductions. So the law school network, as many law schools as there are out there, the network can be pretty small. And I think trying to meet people, I met a bunch of people over the summer who were interning with friends of mine from my 1L school. And so they were really generous about talking to me and, letting me know that I should definitely get in touch once I'm on campus. And so a lot of my HLS friends that I made, I had actually ended up meeting before I even went there. And so I was able to reach out to them when I got there and like have some sort of social cushion waiting for me once I arrived. And I think that helped a lot, because like, regardless whether you're transferring or not, having people who can sort of take you out of the law school space, and just kind of live your life with you is incredibly important.
So true. And I love your comment of community. I was reading a book on health or wellness, since I read books on stuff like that. And more and more, kind of the pillars of health, community is one of them that they talk about, that it's very hard for us to be emotionally and physically healthy if we don't have some people to hold us up. And, I think that, I really like the fact that you talked about one of the important parts of making that transfer experience work for you was to find that community. You networked and you asked for help, but that was a priority. And I think that especially if you are transferring to some place that's very prestigious, and maybe if you're someone who doesn't feel like you're a member of that club yet, or that you don't, maybe you didn't go to an Ivy League undergrad or whatever it might be. We talk about imposter syndrome and how there can be a lot of complicated feelings that go into finding a lot of success. Finding the community to hold you in that space, I think is something that should definitely not be overlooked. So I think that was a really great point.
Yeah. And you'll also have a transfer community, most likely. So I know at least at Harvard, they did have a special transfer orientation, and tried to set up opportunities for the transfer students to really be treated as a section. There's a section that was coming in a year later. I will say, because I didn't do the on-campus interviews, they're called EIP at HLS, that was an opportunity where I think there were only 3 of us that didn't do that. And so most of the folks that were transferring in got a chance to connect with each other through that experience. And I did still, throughout the course of my experience, develop really great friendships within the transfer community as well. But, I had to do sort of my own rogue friend hunting.
I just have this great picture of you just like prowling around campus,
doing some recon.
Right. But like, do you want to be my friend? Do you want to talk? Do you have an interest in social justice?
Can you please fill out this survey?
Right, exactly. I have a short questionnaire. It's kind of like online dating, but
I was open to being friends with anyone at that point. Trust me. There was no like making the cut to be my friend. I was more like, Frankenstein's monster, being like friend and like running up to people. But so for those who do want to transfer and also are going to be interviewing with law firms, I think that that is a space where the other transfers like really did get a chance to connect and bond and turn to each other for support. And we're also going through this own sort of what I hear is a rigorous experience. And so yet another opportunity to connect.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's all really great perspective. We're almost out of time, but I do want to take a few moments to talk about the public interest work that you do, because I think it is very interesting. And I think it's a great example of what you can do when you have a passion for something that, you kept that passion all through law school, and then you are still working in that passion after law school.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really what got me through law school. I think if I had gone in not knowing what I wanted to do, or if the law somehow felt untethered to what the world looks like, I would have a really hard time, first of all, grasping the material, but also just staying. I mean, I don't want to be too much of a downer, but the way it's set up, it can end up being a really toxic experience for people.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the inequities that we see play out in the world, law school tends to be a bit of a microcosm for those. And so what really kept me grounded was, first of all, like doing work in the community that reminded me like, okay, I am like really, really privileged. like even though I'm like, oh, like this class is hard. Like
right.
It's not harder than like deciding if you're gonna buy a bus pass or buy dinner for your kids, So that's important perspective to maintain. But yeah, no, I mean, it honestly made me enjoy my law school experience more because it did feel like I was getting closer to having the access and the impact and usefulness that I wanted to have. And it was really, really great training for what I'm doing now, ultimately. Luckily I had the fortunate experience of going in with purpose and of having work that I loved before that to kind of get me to that place, and then having work that I love waiting for me on the other side. So I'm a really, really lucky person. And I think grounding my law school experience in that always helped me return to why I was there at all. And I think it's important to have some sort of touchstone that reminds you, what it's all about for you. And that will obviously look different for everyone. But for me, it was so that I could end up where I am now.
Yeah. And do you mind telling people a little bit about where you are now and what you're doing?
Yeah. So I work in Los Angeles. I work at an organization called A New Way of Life Reentry Project, and we support people who are coming out of prison and work to restore the civil rights of people who are facing barriers to employment, to housing, to education, and to about 48,000 other things that as a result of their criminal records. And so we provide a bunch of supportive services for women in particular. And the work that I'm doing focuses on the ways in which incarceration tears families apart and keeps them separated even after a parent or a loved one has been released. And so we're looking for ways to close those gaps and make sure that people can sustain their connections with their children from prison and reunify them with them once they're out. And so we're doing that through sort of system advocacy and movement building and using the law as a tool to support organizing. So I collaborate with organizers. What I love about my organization in particular is that it's not run by lawyers. It's run by organizers. It's run by people who themselves have been formerly incarcerated, and they just tell the lawyers what to do. So we're really, we're deferring to their goals and building our practice around that. And then the other work that I do is within that project, when we were talking to parents inside about what was a space in which they needed advocacy and felt that it might have made the difference, a lot of them were talking about the experience of knowing that their children, while they were inside, knowing that their children would be safe with, say, their sister or their mother. Yeah. And then being told that because, your mom has a criminal record, whether it's from 5 years ago or 20 years ago or 40 years ago, that's going to be a barrier to them keeping your child out of foster care. And so their kids would end up in the system and really be lost to them. Wow. When, there was a perfectly good and safe and loving home waiting for them. And so what I do is support these relatives, these loved ones who have records that are a barrier to them providing the loving home that these kids need. And so it's yet another way in which we see that family unity is a collateral consequence of incarceration, even 20 years down the line. And so we're trying to really chip away at that as a barrier.
Well, I mean, it's incredibly important work and life-changing work for, such an underserved segment of our population. And yeah, and I think we're really lucky that, we have folks like you doing that work. But, I hope our listeners can also hear the passion, that you speak with about what you do, because I think that is, whether you're transferring or you're a 1L or you're thinking about going to law school, to be able to find something that excites you and allows you to feel like you have a purpose and you're getting to make a difference, really is what you're doing at school. So to find that purpose and to be able to find your place where you can do work that's important to you, I think is really special.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, with that, we're out of time, but thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. This is really fun. I feel like we could talk about this for a long time, but maybe we'll just have to do it again sometime soon and talk about some other stuff.
Obviously, my information is on the website. So if people want to connect with me and have, further one-on-one conversations, if they're thinking about transferring or, have more questions about the process, I'm so happy to make myself available. It can definitely, it can be full of conflict. And so, just, hearing people work through that is something I'd be more than happy to do.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on iTunes, because we'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to myself or Allison, Lee at lawschooltoolbox.com or Allison at lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us or our team via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening. Good luck on your transfer decisions, and we'll talk soon.